That dog's worth 20. Take it or leave it." The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip across the dusty lot, echoing through the muggy Kansas air. His sun-leathered hand slapped the wooden podium again as if the insult wasn't complete. Without the sound of dismissal, the dog, mud-caked ribs showing, eyes sunken but watchful, didn't flinch. She just stood there, still as a shadow, chained to the rusted pole behind the livestock crates behind the thin crowd near the back, where the weeds crept in. 17-year-old Maeve Harlan clenched her fists until her knuckles paled. Her father's badge, long buried in a drawer and heavier in memory than in metal, seemed to burn in her coat pocket. That wasn't just any dog. The whispers had spread fast through town that morning. Sheriff Harlan's Gurlius, that Harlan, the one who died trying to stop the diner robbery last fall, was back from the city, back with the kind of silence only grief and stubbornness can raise. And now she was standing at the outskirts of this ragged auction yard, eyes locked not on the people, not on the prices, but on the dog. That dog, the one from the accident. 20 going once. The auctioneer barked again. He looked bored. He didn't care if the dog was sick or trained or once belonged to a war vet. All he cared about was clearing space and closing early. Going TWI. Don't. Maeve's voice cracked into the heat like a sudden wind. She moved forward now, through the crowd. Not fast, but deliberate. As if she was stepping through years of memories she hadn't asked for. Old man Kent, who'd been standing near the front with his ticket in hand, turned with a scowl. "What did you say, girl?" "I said don't. You can't sell her. Not like that. Not for 20. The crowd shifted. Some murmured, some laughed. The kind of bitter chuckle folks use when they're more uncomfortable than amused. "Unless you're buyin', girl," the auctioneer sneered. "You best move aside. Ain't got time for city drama." Maeve reached into her pocket, not for cash, not yet, but for a small folded photograph. Her hand shook only slightly as she stepped up to the auction platform. She held it out. It was a picture, worn and creased. Her father, Deputy Ellis Harlan, kneeling in uniform beside the same dog, except in that photo, the dog wasn't broken. She was alert, proud. Her name, printed in bold beneath the image, was Juno. The crowd quieted. The auctioneer looked down, then looked away. "Dog ain't got tags now. No proof of ownership. She's strayed too long. Property of the shelter now." "That shelter didn't even know her name," Maeve said, her voice low. "She's been missing since that day. The day my dad—" Her breath caught. She was in the patrol car with him. They both went off the bridge. They never found her. A woman near the back gasped, covering her mouth. Maeve didn't blink. She stepped forward until she was at the base of the platform. The dog turned its head now slowly for the first time. Juno's ears twitched, then lifted. Her tail gave the smallest thump. "You think $20 is what she's worth?" Maeve asked, her voice trembling but loud enough for all to hear. "Then maybe you forgot what she gave up trying to crawl back out of that river. She waited somewhere, hurt, alone. And we let her become this." The wind picked up. Dry leaves scattered around their feet. Silence pressed down heavier than heat. From the shadows near the feed bins, someone cleared their throat. "I'll pitch in," an older man said. "Sheriff Harlan kept this town clean for 20 years. That dog was part of it." Then another voice. A woman, then a kid. People started moving, but Maeve wasn't looking at them. She was crouched now, palm open, eyes locked with Juno's. "You remember me, girl," she whispered. "You found your way back. I'm sorry it took me this long to come find you." Juno moved one step, then another. Then she collapsed against Maeve's chest, trembling. The auctioneer stared at the photo again, then at the crowd. He looked smaller somehow. "No sale," he muttered. "She's already home." But Maeve didn't hear him. Her world had narrowed to the broken creature pressing against her heart to heart. And for the first time since her father's funeral, she cried without shame, without noise. Just the kind of tears that say, "I should have come sooner. But I'm here now." Juno slept for most of the ride home, curled in the passenger seat of Maeve's pickup. She barely moved except to lift her head. When they passed through a shaded grove or when a bump in the road stirred something deeper inside her, Maeve kept glancing over, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally brushing Juno's matted fur. She wanted to speak, apologize again, maybe, but her throat stayed thick. The silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt necessary, like the quiet that follows after someone has finally been found. The house hadn't changed much since her father's death, though the yard had grown wild and the porch light flickered when she switched it on. Inside, dust layered the picture frames and the scent of pine cleaner had long faded. She led Juno in slowly, letting her explore. The dog moved gingerly, favoring her back leg, sniffing corners, pausing at the hallway where her old bed used to sit. Maeve hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't been able to. She just packed it up, folded it tight, and stored it under her father's old dresser. Now, she pulled it out, unrolled it, and watched as Juno circled 3 times before collapsing into the familiar fabric with a tired sigh. The first night passed in silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the soft, low whimpers that came from Juno's dreams. Maeve lay on the couch with a blanket pulled up to her chin, eyes wide open in the dark. Every time Juno whimpered, she whispered back, "I'm here, girl, I'm here." By morning, a question had started to form. She'd avoided it all night, but it was there now, pressing at the back of her mind, sharp and cruel. How did Juno survive that night when Dad didn't? Maeve remembered the accident as fragments, the call that came while she was in art class. The officer who walked into the room, hat in his hands, the drive back to town under a sky that felt too bright for such news. They said the river swept, the patrol car under said her father must have hit his head, never unbuckled. The divers found him days later. No sign of Juno. They assumed she'd drowned too, but she hadn't. She'd escaped somehow. Maeve watched the dog, now limping toward her food bowl, still thin despite the meals she'd wolfed down. There were scars on her leg, one above her eye, a dark line near her ribs that looked like a burn. Injuries too specific for just a crash. Something didn't add up. She grabbed her father's casebook from the bottom drawer that afternoon. It was old, the leather cracked and brittle. Inside were photos, reports, pages of handwritten notes. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, maybe comfort, maybe answers, but then something stopped her cold. A sketch, quick, rough, done in pencil. It showed the bend in the river just before the bridge, and next to it, circled in red, were 3 words. Tire marks fresh, not washed. Maeve frowned. She flipped to the report the sketch was stapled to. Her father had been following up on a series of break-ins near the county line. Small stuff at first, tools, propane, fuel, but the last entry was different. Old Watkins barn. Lock blown off, blood on door, fresh prints. Dog responded with aggression, ears alert, tail rigid. That was the last note he ever wrote. Maeve stared at the words. A chill passed through her. Why had no one told her this? Why had it been framed as an accident? A bridge, a slick road, a patrol car lost in the current. But this sketch, this note hinted at something else, something darker. Her father had been tracking someone, and Juno had known she was there. She saw. The next morning she took Juno back to the river. It wasn't easy. The dog resisted at first, legs stiff, body shaking, but Maeve didn't push. She sat on the grass near the embankment and waited. Eventually Juno came, not close, just enough to see the water. Maeve pulled out her phone and opened the sheriff's report again. The location where the tire marks were found was upstream from the bridge off the service road that led to the Watkins barn. She stood, brushed herself off, and whispered, "Come on, girl, let's find the rest of the truth." They drove slow. The road was mostly gravel and overgrown now, with tire ruts barely visible. When they reached the barn, Maeve felt her stomach turn. It was half collapsed, the roof sagging, the door still scarred where something had clearly been forced open. Juno froze, then growled low, guttural, something ancient in her throat. Maeve stepped inside, coughing against the dust. Sunlight sliced through the holes in the wall. There wasn't much left, just rusted tools, broken crates, old ropes. But then, in the back corner, she saw something strange. A wall panel, slightly ajar. She pried it open and found a narrow crawl space. Behind it, inside were remnants, scraps of a top, half-burned documents, a broken two-way radio, and a badge, bent, scarred, covered in soot. Her father's spare. Maeve stared at it, her pulse roaring in her ears. Her father had been here, before the river, maybe taken here, which meant the crash wasn't just a crash. It meant someone staged it. Behind her, Juno let out a sound Maeve had never heard before. Not a bark, not a whine. A sound full of pain, memory, recognition. Maeve turned, knelt down, and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck. "We're going to find out who did this," she whispered. "I swear to you. We'll finish what he started." And somewhere, in the dust of that forgotten barn, a storm began to form. Not in the sky, but inside the heart of a girl who had just realized her father's death wasn't fate, it was murder. Maeve couldn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, but her mind was not. It kept looping back to that bent badge, the scorch marks, the blood-like stains in the barn's floorboards. She didn't know how long she sat at the kitchen table with the evidence laid out in front of her. But when the morning sun crept across the windowsill, she was still there, heart-pounding, tracing every detail with shaking fingers. Juno stayed close. She hadn't growled since they left the barn, but her body was tense, watchful, as if the past had shaken loose inside her and couldn't be caged again. Maeve reached down and rested her hand gently on Juno's head. "We have to go back," she whispered, more to herself than to the dog. "Not just to the barn. To Dad's files. To everything they didn't want me to find." The sheriff's department hadn't changed much. Same faded flag out front, same broken bench by the door. But the people inside had shifted. Sheriff Raymer, once her father's deputy, now running the whole place, looked startled when Maeve walked in. He tried to mask it with a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I'll be," he said, pushing his hat back. "Maeve Harlan, been a while." She didn't smile. "I need to see my dad's old case logs." He hesitated. "Maeve, we gave you all his personal effects after the funeral. The rest belongs to the department. Chain of custody and all." "I know what chain of custody means," she snapped. "And I know my dad didn't crash that night he was taken. Juno was hurt. I found his spare badge burnt behind a false wall in the Watkins barn. Rammer's jaw clenched, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression: regret, worry, fear. But it was gone before she could name it. There's nothing in those files you need to see, he said. Softer now. The case is closed. It shouldn't be. He looked down at his desk. It's been 10 months, Maeve. You don't want to stir up ghosts that already cost you everything. Maeve leaned in. I didn't come back to make peace, Sheriff. I came back to find the truth. That afternoon she drove out to see Elias Torrance. Elias had been her father's best friend. He used to come by for Sunday dinners, always bringing pecan pie from Greeley's bakery and old police stories he'd toned down just enough for a teenage girl to hear. But after her dad's death, he'd vanished. No funeral attendance, no phone calls, just gone. She found him living in a trailer on the far edge of Barlow County near the woods. His beard was longer now, eyes more sunken, but the moment he saw her standing at his door, his shoulders slumped like he knew this moment had been coming for a long time. I didn't think you'd come, he said, but I figured one day you might. I found the badge, she said. In the barn. Dad was investigating something the night he died, something he didn't report officially. What was it? Elias stepped aside and motioned for her to come. In the inside smelled of oil and smoke. Papers were scattered across the table, some yellowed, some stained. On the wall, a single photo of her father in uniform, smiling, stared back at her like a memory frozen in time. There was a man, Elias said after a long pause. Name was Leo Wexler, former military contractor. Dishonorably discharged. Moved into the area quiet like a few years back. Started buying up properties under fake LLCs, old barns, shacks, empty stores, places no one would notice. Maeve felt her pulse spike. What was he doing with them? No one knew for sure. But your dad thought he was moving something. Illegal weapons maybe, or chemicals. He didn't have proof, just patterns. Places hit with break-ins, missing equipment, and always strange tire tracks. That's what he was following that night, she said mostly to herself. He must have found something real. Elias nodded. He called me an hour before it happened. Said he was heading out to the Watkins property. Told me not to tell anyone else, not Rammer, not Dispatch. Said if he didn't check in, I'd know something went wrong. But you didn't come, Maeve said, voice cracking. I was afraid, Elias whispered. I told myself he'd be fine, that he was being dramatic, and by the time I got out there it was over. The car was in the river. They were already calling it an accident. Maeve turned away, fury and grief battling in her chest. You let them bury the truth. I know, he said, and his voice broke. I live with it every day. That night, Maeve sat on the floor of her childhood bedroom with Juno curled beside her. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but she barely noticed her mind was burning. Leo Wexler, a name she'd never heard until today, but one that now felt welded to everything that had gone wrong. She searched the name online. Not much surfaced. A few old records. A bankruptcy case. A blurry photo from an article 10 years ago. But one detail caught her breath. The article mentioned a scar, a long pale one across his left cheek, souvenir of a roadside bomb in Kandahar. Maeve's hand trembled as she scrolled through her phone's gallery, back to the crowd at the dog auction. She'd taken a photo of Juno's rescue, not for vanity, but for proof. In the background, half blurred but unmistakable, stood a man in a brown coat. He had a scar, a pale streak slicing across his cheek like lightning on stone. Her breath stopped. He'd been there. Watching. Juno had growled. But Maeve hadn't understood why. Now she did. Leo Wexler wasn't gone. He was still here, and somehow, he knew Juno had survived. Maeve couldn't move at first. Her phone screen dimmed and went black, but her breath stayed shallow, caught between disbelief and something colder, something like fear. The man with the scar, Leo Wexler. He had been there at the auction, not as a buyer, not as a bystander, as a watcher, observing from the edges, unnoticed by everyone but Juno. Maeve's mind reeled back to that moment, the way Juno had stiffened, her tail low, a low growl vibrating through her chest. It hadn't been the crowd, the auctioneer, or the leash. It had been him. She turned toward Juno now, sleeping restlessly by the door, legs twitching as if running in dreams. How long had Wexler been keeping tabs? Had he followed Juno to the shelter? Did he know who had taken her home? Maeve rose slowly, her limbs heavy. She crossed to her father's room, the one she hadn't touched since the funeral, and opened the closet, where he used to keep his off-duty gear. She didn't need a badge or a gun to feel like her father's daughter. But right now, she needed something else entirely. Answers, the kind people only gave when you pushed them to the edge. The next morning she drove back to the auction yard. It was empty now, the stalls abandoned, but the caretaker, old Buck, was fixing a fence near the back. He squinted at her with tired eyes. You again, he said. Hammer paused midair. I need your security footage, she said bluntly. Buck snorted. You think we're running CIA ops out here? That camera on the roof's older than me, and it don't even blink half the time. Did it blink that day? Maeve asked. He hesitated. Made of, I dunno. I saw a man there, she continued, stepping closer. Tall brown coat, scar on his face. Didn't bid, just watched. I think he's dangerous. Buck leaned against the post, suddenly more alert. You mean the guy who parked way out near the grain silos? Maeve's pulse jumped. You saw him, didn't like the way he looked at the dog. Watched her the whole time. Thought maybe he was the one who dropped her off. She showed up 2 nights before, tied to the front gate. No note, just that dog and a piece of chain. Maeve felt a cold sweat start at her neck. Do you still have the chain? Buck jerked a thumb toward a pile of scrap. Might be there. She rummaged through rusted parts and broken hinges until she found it thick, short, with a padlock still attached. It wasn't a leash, it was a restraint. Whoever tied Juno there hadn't wanted her to escape. He'd wanted someone to find her, but not just anyone. Someone who'd remember. And now Maeve realized Vexler hadn't just been watching. Been waiting. Testing the waters. Seeing who would take the bait. She left the auction yard with the chain in her passenger seat, a storm gathering in her chest. Back at home, she placed it on the table next to her father's badge, her fingers running over the scorched leather. Juno watched her quietly, her body still tense. Maeve's phone buzzed. Just then an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. A pause. Then a voice, smooth but grating, like metal on gravel. You're digging up old ghosts, Maeve. Her stomach turned to stone. Who is this? You know who, and you know you should have left that dog to die. Maeve's voice dropped, low and cold. She remembers everything. Another pause, then laughter, dry, humorless. Dogs don't talk, but she points. Maeve shot back. And I found your hideout, the badge, the burnt evidence. You think nobody's going to believe me? Or I think they'll believe just enough to get themselves killed. The call ended. Maeve stood frozen, her heart hammering so loud she barely heard the click of claws on tile. Juno had stood up, her ears were forward, and her eyes, those tired, scarred eyes, were locked on the door. That night, Maeve didn't sleep. She boarded up the windows, checked the locks, and placed her father's old hunting knife under her pillow. Juno didn't sleep either. She stood guard near the door, alert, quiet, waiting. Maeve sat beside her, hand resting gently on her back, her voice steady in the dark. He thinks we're afraid. He thinks we'll run, but we're not. Morning brought no relief, just a message. Taped to her front gate was a note. No signature, no threats, just a simple sentence. Typed in block letters. Watkins Barn was just a start. Check the mill. Maeve's breath caught. The old Langdon mill had been shuttered for years. Her dad used to take her there to fish when she was little, before the water got polluted and the machinery was stripped for parts. It was a forgotten place, much like the barn. And now, it was calling her again. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not Elias, not Sheriff Raymer, not even Buck, just her. And Juno, no backup. Just the dog who'd crawled out of a river to find her way home. And the girl who refused to let her father die for nothing. The mill sat like a skeleton against the sky, metal bones and broken glass. Maeve parked 100 yards out and approached, slowly, every nerve on fire. Juno walked beside her, tail stiff, eyes scanning every shadow. Inside, the air smelled of rust and mildew. The floor was littered with shattered glass and scraps of tarp, but in the center of the old grinding room was something new. A table, clean, and on it a file. Maeve stepped forward, her breath shallow. Inside the folder were photos. Her father, his car, the barn, surveillance stills. Pages of typed notes. He had been close, so close. There were records of shipments, lists of locations, coded messages between names she didn't recognize. And then, at the bottom, one final page. A photo. Juno, standing in front of the patrol car, taken from a distance. She looked younger, healthier. It was dated for days before the crash. Maeve's knees nearly gave out. They'd been watching before the accident. Before the so-called break-in, they'd been planning it. This wasn't retaliation. This had always been a setup, and suddenly, behind her, Juno growled deep and sharp. Maeve turned. Footsteps echoed from the far corridor, slow, deliberate. Someone else was here. The footsteps came slow, almost deliberate, as if the person behind them had no reason to rush. Maeve stood frozen, the open file still trembling in her hands. Juno had planted herself between Maeve and the sound, shoulders squared, ears pinned back, her growl steady and rising. From the far end of the mill, Leo Vexler emerged. He wasn't dressed like a ghost or a villain, just a man in a tattered coat, boots heavy with dust, and that pale scar gleaming across his cheek like a cruel fingerprint. He walked with an ease that unnerved Maeve, like someone visiting a place he'd already conquered. I wondered if you'd come, he said, voice as gravelly as she remembered from the phone. Your father did, and he died for it. Maeve didn't answer. Her breath was steady now, her fear replaced by something sharper, more grounded. She stepped forward, putting herself beside Juno. You didn't expect Juno to survive, she said, her voice low. But she did, and she brought me everything you tried to hide. Vexler's eyes flicked to the file in her hands, then back to the dog. I underestimated her. That's on me. But you've made this more complicated than it needs to be. She remembers you, Maeve said. That night at the river she tried to stop you. That's why she was hurt. You tied her up, left her for dead. Vexler shrugged. I was cleaning up. Your father found what he wasn't supposed to. Had too many questions, started poking into shipments that weren't his business. I warned him. Maeve could feel Juno shaking at her. sighed, but the dog didn't move. She stood like stone. You set the crash up, Maeve said, her voice breaking for the first time. Made it look like an accident. Put his car in the water, let me believe he just died. You made me bury him without knowing the truth. You weren't supposed to come back, Vexler replied simply. This town forgets fast. I didn't, Maeve said, and neither did she. Something shifted then, a flicker in Vexler's expression. Doubt, maybe, or something smaller, fear. Should end this now, he muttered, before you cause more noise. But he didn't raise a weapon. He didn't lunge, and Maeve saw it in that moment, the flaw in him. He thought control was something permanent, that people were pawns, predictable. He hadn't counted on grief turning into fury, or a daughter learning to finish what her father started. Juno made the first move. It wasn't violent, just a single step forward, then another. Her growl stopped, and instead she stood tall as if saying, I'm still here. You failed, Vex. Hand twitched. Maeve spoke before he could move. There are copies of the files, multiple. Sheriff Raymer has one now, and the press will have it before sunset. He blinked. I'm not here for revenge, she added. I'm here to end what you started. You don't scare me. You just used to scare him. For a long moment, silence held. Vexler didn't speak, didn't run. But the truth finally spoken aloud hung in the air, heavier than any threat. It broke something in him, not regret, but understanding. I should have killed the dog when I had the chance, he said softly, almost to himself. You didn't, Maeve said, and that's why you lose. She didn't call the police, didn't need to. By the time she and Juno stepped outside, Vexler still hadn't moved. He just stood in the ruin of his secrets, silent, finally realizing that everything he tried to erase had survived him. Maeve drove straight to the sheriff's office. When she walked in, Raymer was waiting with a look that told her he knew, maybe not all the details, but enough. She handed over the file, said nothing more than, you'll want to read page 12. Then she left. Later that evening she sat on the back porch of her father's house. Juno lay beside her, head in Maeve's lap, breathing slow, calm. The wind moved through the trees the way it used to when her dad sat here reading the paper, humming old songs under his breath. Maeve watched the sun dip low behind the hills, casting the yard in orange and gold. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Justice hadn't come with flashing lights or headlines. It had come the quiet way, through memory, through persistence, through a dog that refused to die and a girl who refused to forget. Maeve reached into her pocket and pulled out the old photograph, the one of her father and Juno, both of them proud, whole, looking into the lens like they belonged to the same mission. She held it to the light, smiled. I found him, she whispered. We found him, and, for the first time in almost a year, she felt something close to peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because it finally meant something.